welcome back to Socialette. This is episode 429. Now, the last couple of episodes, we've been looking at how you're overcomplicating your launches and why you're doing it. This episode, I'm giving you practical tips on how you can actually stop overcomplicating your launches because it's going to get in the way of your launch success if you're constantly overcomplicating your launches and self sabotaging them. So for me, I know that a big sign I'm overcomplicating something is when I start to feel overwhelmed. Whether that's overwhelmed because I'm overthinking it, or overwhelmed because I'm trying to make it perfect, or overwhelmed because I've procrastinated it and left it all to the very last minute, and now I don't have time to do all of the things that are left. So if you're starting to feel that feeling of overwhelm at your launch, that's a really good sign that you are doing one of those things that's overcomplicating it. So when I start to feel that way, I try to now catch myself and I pause and I ask myself, could I be making this harder than it needs to be? Could I be making this harder than it needs to be? I want you to go back and listen to episodes 426 and 427 on the 16 signs that you're overcomplicating your launches. And I want you to make a note of any of those behaviors that you do. So write down a little list, grab a piece of paper, write down a list of all of those behaviors that you do. And then I want you to journal on it. Journal on it, or even if you process things better in your head, think on it, go for a walk and think about it, something like that. I want you to ask yourself these questions. So, what usually triggers it? If you're thinking, for example, procrastination is your overcomplicating behavior, what triggers that procrastination? For me, it's when it's something that I feel afraid to do, or I feel like it might be too difficult or it might be too easy. Those things trigger my procrastination. So then I want you to think about, okay, what do you do in response when that's triggered? So for example, maybe something that triggers overcomplicating in you is when you start to think about the tech part of your launch. And then in response to thinking about the tech, you spend hours researching the best platform for your launch and then you get overwhelmed and you give up. Then I want you to ask yourself, what is the consequence of me doing this behavior in 1 year, in 5 years? What is this going to cost me? What is this behavior costing me? So if you're constantly spending all this time researching platforms and you're getting overwhelmed and giving up, in a year's time, you're going to have fallen even further behind on your launch. In 5 years' time, you probably still won't have launched unless you change this behavior. And then the last question for you is actually one that I got from the first chapter of Tim Ferriss's book, Tribe of Mentors. And I love this question. I try to infuse this into my business wherever I can. And that question is, what would this look like if it were easy? What would this look like if it were easy? So if we're going back to the example of when you're thinking about tech and you're spending hours researching the platforms, getting overwhelmed and giving up, maybe a way to that this would look easy would be to ask someone who's already launched. Maybe it would be settling for a platform that seems good enough. It might not be perfect, it might not have every single feature you want, but maybe it's good enough for your launch. Maybe it's good enough to get your product out there. So there you go. 4 questions to reflect on for any of those overcomplicating behaviors that show up. What triggers it? What do I do in response? What are the consequences of this in 1 year and 5 years? And what would this look like if it were easy? All right. That is it for today's episode. If you know anyone who is overcomplicating their launches and might benefit from listening to this episode, please do tell them about it and do tell everyone in your life about Socialette because that is how I can help more people. Thank you so much for listening. Catch you next time.